So good day to everyone around the world. It's a real pleasure to join you here from Port Vila, Vanuatu. And as you may have heard, Vanuatu is undertaking now a transformative initiative to address accountability and transparency and the obligations of states to act to address climate harm that is being caused to the most vulnerable. Vanuatu is bringing a resolution to the United Nations General Assembly on the 29th of this month in New York, asking for the world's highest court, the UN International Court of Justice, to provide an advisory opinion on just what states should and should not do under international law to protect human rights from climate impacts. We've got an incredible lineup of speakers who will tell us their perspectives of this initiative from different sectors and from different geographical regions. But first, Minister of Climate Change from Vanuatu, Ralph Regenvanu, who will give us an overview about how and why this initiative commenced and what can be expected as an outcome. So I will just show the video now from the Honorable Minister Regenvanu.
Good morning. I'm very pleased to address you today to discuss an existential issue for the nation of Vanuatu and indeed the entire planet, climate change. For more than 5 decades, science has been providing stark warning about the chemical and physical consequences of greenhouse gas emissions. Sadly, the short-sighted and economically driven policies of many states meant that little heed was paid, and today Vanuatu's people suffer from the insidious rise in sea levels that eats away at our villages, ocean acidification that is dissolving our reefs, increasing sea surface temperatures bleaching our corals and seagrasses, landslides that erase entire villages and plantations, and prolonged droughts that shrivel and kill our subsistence crops before they can even be harvested. This climate suffering is being experienced right now. Over the last 7 days, Vanuatu has been hit by 2 Category 4 cyclones, which leave us in a state of emergency today. All islands and 100% of our population is affected, with schools and clinics ripped from their foundations, infrastructure washed away, and food and water security severely compromised. This is unjust, as we are not responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions that are causing this crisis. Friends, this is not just a Vanuatu problem. What we are experiencing now, and have faced for many years, we see the rest of the world beginning to feel. We empathise with you and hope that we have the collective courage to turn this canoe around. 7 years ago, 196 countries adopted the Paris Agreement, the international treaty many hoped would finally take us off the path of planetary destruction. Countries around the world celebrated this landmark first step towards what we hoped would be accountable, transparent, and life-saving requirements to reduce the impact of global warming. But unfortunately, the pledges, promises, and commitments made under this agreement take us well beyond the safe operating limit of 1.5 degrees. Little effort has been expended on the human rights-related violations linked to climate change, and countries still tend to see the Paris Agreement as the only international law relevant to climate change. Beyond the UNFCCC, however, other instruments under agreed international law already contain clear obligations to prevent harm to the environment and protect human rights. Specifically, we see climate-relevant obligations in the Charter of the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights and on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the Conventions on the Rights of the Child, the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, the Vienna Convention for the Protection of the Ozone Layer, the Montreal Protocol on Substances that Deplete the Ozone Layer, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, and more. But how can the obligations under a wide body of existing treaties be applied to the climate crisis? Pacific Island University students ask themselves and others these questions. Those discussions grew into a truly international call for clarity and for justice. Vanuatu accepted the call from our youth and has since been leading the campaign for an advisory opinion on climate change from the International Court of Justice. The United Nations International Court of Justice, or ICJ, is the only principal organ of the UN system that has not yet been given an opportunity to help address the climate crisis. To get to the court, Vanuatu and dozens of co-sponsoring states will table a resolution at the United Nations General Assembly. If the resolution is adopted, either by unanimous consensus or by a simple majority of votes, then the International Court of Justice will consider our question. You can read the full resolution on www.vanuatuicj.com. But in summary, we are asking two simple questions. What are the obligations that all states have under a range of international laws to protect the climate system and the environment from greenhouse gases? And two, what are the legal consequences when states actually do cause climate-related harm to other states or to future generations? It is our view that this question should have been asked long before now, and that the answer given by the world's highest court will help countries get back on track in upholding the rule of international law and bringing human rights thinking into energy and climate decisions moving forward. I want to be very clear that this initiative is not intended to name or shame any particular nation. And despite being brought to the UN's highest legal body, we are not suing anybody. There will be no winners or losers, and no state will be required to do anything as a result of the advisory opinion of the court. Importantly, we are only asking for clarification of legal obligations already agreed under international law and not anything new. The question is also forward-looking, considering both historical emissions, but also emissions of today and the future. The primary goal of this exercise is to bring clarity to all states so that we can take better action moving forward. The resulting advisory opinion will help states revise and enhance their nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement and strengthen domestic laws and policies. The advisory opinion will likely identify gaps in international law, which will help us as we build and improve our multilateral climate negotiation processes. The advisory opinion will also ensure we base our relationships on the adherence to the rule of international law. As we have seen with the recent destabilizing war in Ukraine, we must prioritize an international legal framework that is clear on what is acceptable state behavior and what is not. The rule of law is foundational to the United Nations and to its mission of peace. From the smallest villages in the Pacific Islands to the global stage, the rule of law is all that stands between peace and stability and a climate-safe world and utter destruction. The rule of law protects the vulnerable and is the basis of international cooperation, especially in regards to climate change. Vanuatu has heard the strong call and expectation from grassroots youth movements and indeed over 1,700 civil society organizations from around the world to draft a forward-looking, indeed intergenerational question. Colleagues, the focus of the question is on the protection of fundamental human rights of present and future generations, a critical shift in narrative which may yield greater climate action and ambition among all states in the global community. I think we have been speaking about climate change in terms of degrees of Celsius and tons of carbon for too long. This is not relevant to many decision makers. It is time we reframe climate decision making in terms of human rights. So what is next? The UN General Assembly will hold a session on the climate justice resolution on the 29th of March this year. There are three options. One, the resolution will be adopted by consensus if all states agree. Two, the resolution will be adopted by simple majority vote if any state shamefully calls for a vote. Three, the resolution fails to be adopted, which is not expected. The early co-sponsoring nations were published on the 1st of March, and as of today, at least 113 other countries have confirmed they will support the adoption of this UNGA resolution. So we are nearly there. But I need your help to ensure that this resolution is adopted. Every country's support counts. There are still countries in the global north, and indeed in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, which have not yet confirmed their support. If you have networks or contacts with influence, now is the time to mobilize them before the adoption session in a few weeks' time. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends, it is time for the world's highest court to give us the clarity we all need to do more. We are out of time in Vanuatu, and our children need us to demonstrate the required leadership. Know that in Vanuatu you have a staunch ally committed to fighting for climate justice. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to the Honorable Minister of Climate Change, Ralph Regenvanu and Vanuatu, for that powerful message, and very clear that this is an initiative to explore existing international legal obligations. Beyond the Paris Agreement, so many covenants and treaties contain these obligations, and the court will help us to bring to bear all of international law on what is an existential climate crisis. So to help us make sense of what this initiative may do now and into the future, we have an incredible panel assembled today. We have from the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network, Langi Seru, who's the coordinator. We also have from the Climate Action Network International, Andreas Sieber. We have David Griffiths from the as a human rights expert and advocate, as well as Malcolm Delesa, who is the climate attaché of the government of Vanuatu. So what I may do is hand over now to Langi Seru to give us your reflections as a member of the Pacific Island community. How do you see the vulnerable nations responding to this initiative, and where might it take you in the future? Over to you, Langi.
Naka, thank you, Chris. And good afternoon to everyone. I'm joining you from Port Vila in Vanuatu, and it's been a very mixed feeling being here in Vanuatu, especially with the twin cyclones that have just crossed through the islands, but also to see the resilience of the people of Vanuatu. So. And we are gathered here also at a time when ambition and action is needed. And I guess for Pacific civil society, we saw the opportunity to support this campaign that has been led specifically by the youth from the Pacific, and I want to give credit to the Pacific Island students fighting climate change that has led this campaign for many years. And I also would like to acknowledge the support of the government of Vanuatu and its leadership in continuing that campaign to the global level, and also the major diplomatic efforts over the last few months in securing support for this campaign. The Pacific really is at the forefront of climate change, and in 2018, our Pacific leaders reaffirmed that climate change remains to be the single greatest threat to the livelihoods, security, and well-beings of the people of the Pacific. In 2015, states from all over the world ratified the Paris Agreement. But so far, we've seen, and I know there's a growing frustration within civil society and many other actors, that the states have really not stood up to the test, stood up to the leadership that's required of them at this time when that's needed. And they have not been ambitious enough to reach the 1.5 degree target that was agreed upon in Paris. And then, like we say, for the Pacific, the 1.5 degrees is not a goal, it's our lifeline. Countries like Tuvalu and Kiribati are under threat of going underwater, and the people and communities in these countries face immense human rights violations. Their rights are being undermined as sea level rise, threatening food security, water security, health, the right to housing, and many more. So this is really an opportunity to get that legal clarity from existing international laws, and really cement the science behind climate change. We've seen that there's still a disconnect between science and the work at the political level. And so we hope that this advisory opinion will, sort of cement and bring those two together. And so over the last year or so, we've been part of a coalition of civil society organization that has been supporting the government of Vanuatu really to elevate and amplify the campaign, and to really to amplify what this campaign is about, and get and build pressure from the grassroots people to demand their countries to vote in support of this campaign. We know that the UNFCCC for many years now has been dragging on its foot on ambition. It's a very opaque and a very abstract process, and you also get other players in that space that can influence the decisions and the outcomes that comes out of that multilateral space. So you have the fossil fuel lobbyists that we've seen increased over the years, participating at COP. This with the vote for the ICJO that's coming up in at the end of this month. It's one country, one vote, and it's transparent. We get to see which countries are in support of the resolution to seek an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice. We can see who are the laggards. We can call them out. And so this is an opportunity for civil society to really build that pressure between now and then the 29th of March. And just to sort of wrap up, the human rights of Pacific Island people has been for many years now, with growing intensity of climate-induced disasters being undermined in many ways. In the example of Fiji, social security is becoming a challenge when governments are not being able to foot the cost of recovery from climate-induced disasters, and the risk has been transferred to people who are really struggling to meet daily, their daily livelihoods and make ends meet at the end of the day. So that risk has been transferred to them, while we see major corporations, oil companies, and big corporations making billions of profits every year. So this is a great injustice, not only for the Pacific, but for many other Pacific small island states. And this is why we're really in support of the campaign that the Vanuatu government intends to table at the UNGA on the 29th of March this year. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Langi, and congratulations to you and to other members of civil society who have truly proven through this initiative that working with governments can in fact address some of the most existential issues that we face. And the fact that you and other young people in the Pacific were the leaders driving this campaign, that have taken a question from law students, classrooms in the Pacific, now to the global stage, definitely deserves recognition. And there's nothing stopping young people from changing the world. And we look forward to more cooperation together. I'd like to hand over now to a colleague from the human rights community who can maybe reflect a little bit more on this aspect of changing the narrative from degrees of Celsius and tons of carbon to the impacts that Langi just talked about on people, fundamental human rights. So I'd like to introduce now David Griffiths to reflect on this ICJ initiative. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Christopher, and great to be here and to be part of this. I should say that I've been involved in this effort for just one day so far. I've been following it for much longer than that, of course. With great admiration for the extraordinary handover from student demand and social movement that was growing on the ground, gradually now towards the highest UN court, and to see that sort of extraordinary interplay between the grassroots demand and this growing global momentum. To introduce myself, I've worked in human rights in one way or another for the last 18 years or so. I'm currently consulting on a variety of different things, including as an associate fellow with Chatham House, the think tank in London. I was most recently, before this, director of the Secretary General's office at Amnesty International at a time when Amnesty too was trying to find its narrative around the interplay of climate change and human rights. So I'm very delighted to be part of this initiative and look forward to to seeing how far it can go. Let me just start by saying that this is a very significant year for human rights. In December, we'll commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so this is a natural moment to reflect on the biggest human rights challenges in the world today. There is, of course, nothing more urgent and more all-encompassing than the climate crisis. And there are three things really that I want to draw out in my 5 minutes. The first is to say that the climate crisis is a human rights crisis, and it is the most consequential of our time, perhaps of all time. It is all-encompassing, both in the present and as we look ahead to the future. It is at once a slow onset crisis and a dramatic crisis, and one which is having immense and immeasurable implications for lives around the world. To ask, I think, as some approach the question, what rights are impacted by climate change, is to ask the wrong question. That's the wrong entry point, I think, into this. Amnesty produced a report in 2021 which spelled out some of it, talking about the right to life, to water, food, housing, health, sanitation, adequate standard of living, work, development, health, environment, culture, self-determination, freedom from discrimination, and cruel, inhumane, and degrading punishment, as well as migration-related rights. And of course, that's all true and extremely all issues that are deeply impacted by the climate crisis. But in a deeper sense, as indeed this report acknowledged, really it's about the way that we need to frame this really is to talk about how the entire context in which all human rights play out is changing, and existential threats to whole countries, population shifts, unforeseen political backlashes, and so forth lie in wait. And we cannot really separate out these sort of identifiable, immediate impacts from this deeper reality that the entire context, the entire arena for all human rights is facing profound change. There is, I think it's no exaggeration to say, nothing that is more important and more consequential to our enjoyment of all human rights in the future. And given all that we know already, the failure to take action based upon this now would be a catastrophic betrayal of human rights. Rather, we must seize upon this opportunity to confront historic inequities in the world and the legacies of colonialism and deprivation which have brought us to this point. The second point I want to make is that human rights tools and mechanisms are a very valuable part of the response. We heard from the minister's video earlier, the international law canon which can be drawn upon as part of this. But when we fully grasp the human rights crisis that we're in, the human rights implications of the climate crisis, the human rights system itself then offers a powerful set of tools, one which has been developed over 75 years, norms, mechanisms, and laws that are deeply embedded in the international system, as well as in domestic constitutions and law, etc. It is all there waiting to be used. And from international human rights law and international norms and standards to strong constitutional protections, which in the case of many countries were developed after the human rights system had been put in place, there is a huge amount that we can lean upon for making the case for litigation and much, much more. So, of course, the concept of international cooperation is itself a duty as part of the international human rights framework. It's there, it's ready to be used, the urgency is immense, and this is a set of tools that we must draw upon more. And what does it include? I mean, there are, of course, significant responsibilities on the part of states. That's the focus of the international human rights framework. And, many remedies exist within that, which, probably too much to go into in any detail now, but certainly we talk about the right to information, participation, remedy for citizens. There are laws and standards around the protection of human rights defenders and environmental defenders, the very people who are trying to protect us and warn us about what we are sleepwalking into. But there is also a growing set of standards and expectations around corporate behavior, and the UN guiding principles are really significant in that regard. And we're seeing a real growth in this area, including with the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which all sounds very boring and wonkish, but in reality, it's part of a very powerful set of tools that are there at our disposal. And then the third point I wanted to make is that human rights will help us to, by providing the guardrails for a just transition. The idea of a just transition and what that means, that energy transition and so many different changes in the way that we must do things, it's a very arbitrary, nebulous concept. And human rights will help to shape and define that and to protect both people and the economic development of countries, and to prevent countries from being left behind in this process. So I think there is a real risk of arbitrariness. There is a real risk to indigenous peoples on land which is being mined for the minerals required for the energy transition. There are plenty of other aspects to this, as people who have worked in industries that have been historically dependent upon fossil fuels are at risk of simply being left behind and discarded. So human rights can help us with navigating this tricky terrain ahead. And there are so many different dimensions to that. And of course, adaptation and financing are really important parts of the picture as well. So really, this is a plea to see the climate crisis as a human rights crisis too, but also to draw upon the mechanisms and the tools that exist within the human rights system to help us find a way through this crisis. And I would say in finishing that none of us divide our lives into categories of climate, human rights, development. We experience all of this as one. And so we only stand to lose if we fail to deploy the full range of tools available. Human rights are, of course, in the end about the fundamental dignity and equality of all humans. The climate crisis is a monumental threat to this ideal, to these ideals. And so if human rights mean anything, we have to act. Thanks.
Thank you so very much, David. 75 years since we made the Declaration on Human Rights, and such a mature space of rules and processes, tools that are available. And of course, the remedies. I mean, you said it yourself, it's businesses now that are taking their human rights obligations in determining their own behavior. If we had done this in the climate change context, even decades ago, where would we be today? So I think this is a really important element that hopefully this advisory opinion will bring forward and change the trajectory, and with those guardrails in place. Thank you so much. I will turn now to my good friend from the Climate Action Network International, which is the body of NGOs around the world working on climate change. Andreas, I'd like to ask you, you've been involved in the UNFCCC climate negotiation spaces for a long time. What are your reflections on how this ICJ advisory opinion might influence or change the way that we cooperate with each other in the climate spaces?
Yeah, thanks so much, Christopher, and thanks for the invite and also all your leadership in this initiative. Very happy to join you here. As CAN, we are one of the focal point of environmental NGOs in the UNFCCC process. I'm working there as the global lead for multilateral process. So looking at the UN, as you said, is quite a bit of our bread and butter work. I want to maybe split it in two parts. First, some overall reflections, and then some thoughts on how it could work concretely, even though we don't have the opinion yet. So first, of course, these advisory opinions are not legally binding. They do inform development of international law and carry great legal weight and moral authority. And I think that in itself is, of course, a value. But what does it do if it is not legally binding, right? Which in many ways you could draw parallels to the Paris Agreement that also isn't legally binding as such. We know that with regards to the legal obligations of state, more clarity is needed, and such a legal avenue can provide guidance for international but also domestic courts. And in my own country, I've seen how actually, and I think in many places around the world, we've seen increasingly over the last couple of years how courts have played a greater role in providing more clarity, but also have played a role in climate policy. And I think that clarity is much needed and will be of much help. So in that respect, we expect some authoritative statements of law with legal effects, even though not binding. Now, when we come to the multilateral space, our main or maybe the most famous and most important instrument for us is the Paris Agreement. And as said, it is not legally binding, which at times frustrates us, which at times seems maybe illogical. But if we take a step back and think about what it does, then it still makes sense in the sense of we have this, the biggest collective actor problem humankind has ever faced. And what the UN does is to provide a framework to tackle this together and to look at each other and see, okay, country A does that, country B does that, and to jointly do hopefully more and in the end, hopefully enough. Now, I'm not saying that this is perfect, but that is the process we got. And within this process, we expect some more consistency from such a decision, and some more coherence when it comes to principles of international law. But concretely, we also expect that this can be used by policymakers, right? So just to speak from my own experience in talking to various policymakers, often if you come to these conferences, for instance, you talk about a COP decision, so the kind of headline decision you have at the COP, and we know at the last COP, actually in the COP cover decision, human rights were mentioned. We also know that it was disappointing with regards, for instance, to cover the root cause of climate change and address fossil fuels, while some real progress was made with regards to addressing loss and damage and establishing a fund. But within all this, if I speak to policymakers, they often say, "Oh, what I actually need is some basis that I can go back to my ministry or to my other ministries and tell them, look, we got this international obligations, and that is a mandate for us to get rolling and get work done." And I think in such a context, that ruling can be quite helpful. So it's one more tool in the arsenal, hopefully, in addition to providing clarity of those people working in various places in the world to try to implement the Paris Agreement. So I think beyond clarity, I think also it can be a real tool for implementation that is much needed. Currently, my colleagues are at the IPCC meetings, and we know what it's going to say, right? That we are far off track and really look at dangerous consequences for climate change. So lastly, I would say such an advisory opinion can also turn into public opinion and hopefully reach a wider audience, which we know is essential for making political progress. And the fact that the draft resolution as it stands without borders and applies to all people and communities really also is its scope that I think makes it quite interesting and hopefully helps us in the end to implement the Paris Agreement and reach its goals. Thanks very much.
Thank you so very much, Andreas. And it's so true. You know, the UNFCCC is just one of many legal instruments, and implementing the Paris Agreement absolutely requires that you do reference and abide by other international laws, treaties, and instruments. So hopefully that clarification will in fact help us achieve the Paris goals. I will turn now to the climate attaché of the government of Vanuatu based at our permanent mission in New York, Mr. Malcolm Dalesa. And Malcolm, if you could tell us a bit more about how this process has evolved, how the political negotiations went, and where we are at this very moment in terms of co-sponsorship. What does that mean for adoption on the 29th? And what happens after that? So please, over to you, Malcolm.
Thank you, Chris. I'm very much delighted to join, a very esteemed lineup of panelists. I'll be very much happy to go through in terms of the political processes, and it's been a very interesting one. And as alluded to earlier by the minister, this whole process started with Vanuatu government taking up the request from a committed group of very passionate law students from the Pacific. And we've had endorsements from leaders, especially early last year from the Caribbean region, as well as the Pacific Island Forum leaders, and as also with the Africa, Caribbean, Pacific states, or the OACPS region of states, and now that we've got a critical mass of states that have been signed up to this important resolution. But I would like to start in terms of what has been happening over here in New York. We've had the core group of countries, 18 countries, including Vanuatu, and this core group of countries assembled and started in September last year to conceptualize and look at the language of the text in coming up with I would say a balancing act, given this core group of countries is a microcosm of the UN membership with wide-ranging interests and perspectives. So over the several months, end of last year and as early this year, there's been very much in-depth deliberations, and particularly around the questions that we've heard the minister outline early in his presentation, and that those particular discussions and deliberations amounted to discussions in terms of the temporal scope of the questions itself, the human rights elements of the resolutions, given the different political stance of states as far as human rights is concerned, and also having to minimize or avoid this divisive language, particularly between, say, the global North and global South, but having to stay true to the particular climate justice elements, by which, very much coming from the global youth perspectives in terms of their concern about their future. So we've had a number of informals end of last year with the first informals, and then in last month we've had two informals consultations to go further into the language of the text, and with that, Vanuatu and the core group of countries put up the the draft or the resolution itself on the 23rd of February for co-sponsorship. So we had a week or so with the 1st of March as a deadline, and as 1st of March we've had 105 co-sponsorship, which first the countries that put up their hands and indicated their co-sponsorship, and then to date we've had 116 additional co-sponsorship that have come on board. So it's been great, and now we're very much looking forward to 29th of March when it will have adoption. So leading up to that, it'll be more about the messaging and the narrative to get others that are, I guess, still haven't made a decision yet. But we've now reached a stage where it's very much an overwhelming number of countries that have co-sponsored. So very, very good in terms of numbers as far as support is concerned. So from the start, it's about going into this, getting this resolution by way of vote, but we're also confident that we might get adoption by consensus. So now, after the 29th of March, then it's basically Vanuatu and the core group of countries in coordinating states in terms of submissions and ensuring that the submissions put to the court will be such that we paint a holistic and coherent picture as far as the impacts of climate change and human rights implications is concerned. So this is something that we're very much looking forward to in terms of not only adoption, but when it goes into the submissions to help the court come up with an advisory opinion, which we believe will provide further clarity and push the envelope and needle as far as climate action is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malcolm, and huge congratulations to the work that you and the diplomatic corps of Vanuatu and the entire core group have done to achieve 116 co-sponsors on a resolution which I think many feared wouldn't ever see the light of day. And this now brings me to my good friend, Professor Salim Hook. There is concern that this initiative is somehow an attempt by the vulnerable developing countries to extract compensation and reparations and financing for loss and damage, which the rich developed world is uncomfortable. How do you see the link between this ICJ initiative and what's going on in the loss and damage spaces?
Thank you very much, Christopher, and thank you all our distinguished panelists, and particularly the representatives from the government of Vanuatu for joining us in this session as part of the Gobeshona conference that we run every year. So my view, Christopher, is that we are actually in a very different situation today from where we were when the Pacific University students initiated this discussion. The government of Vanuatu picked it up and took it forward and advocated with other governments. And the breakthrough was the decision that we were able to achieve in Sharm el-Sheikh in COP27 last year. Excuse me. Despite many years of trying and not succeeding to get an agreement, we did get an agreement. Every single country, including the developed countries, including the United States of America, agreed to go forward to address the impacts of climate change and the losses and damages that are associated with those impacts. And to me, the breakthrough came because of the visibility of those impacts. And we just heard of what happened in Vanuatu in the last few days. This is unheard of. These are unprecedented climate impacts that are definitely scientifically attributable to the fact that global temperature has already passed 1 degrees. And, it'll take almost a miracle now to stay below 1.5 degrees. And so this is now the era of loss and damage from climate change, inescapable. Every country is going to get hit. United States in California just had a snowstorm. California, the sunniest state in the US, had a snowstorm, unheard of. And so this is something that everybody is going to suffer, everybody's going to have to deal with, and no country is ready to deal with it. I can tell you, no country. I would say, relatively speaking, my country, Bangladesh, where I'm speaking from, we are well ahead. We have been taking climate change more seriously than any other country, except the Pacific Island countries like yourselves. I guess we are amongst the forefront of taking climate change impact seriously and preparing ourselves. But, it's impossible. The two cyclones that hit you in the last few days has caused devastation. The devastation cannot be avoided. Human life can be saved. And fortunately, that was in Vanuatu. And we are also very good at saving human lives. But we can't stop the devastation of these events that take place, floods and cyclones in particular. And so we're all going to have to deal with this issue. So to me, it becomes a global responsibility of all citizens, not just leaders who are in charge of governments, but all of us as citizens of planet Earth need to be engaging in dealing with this issue. It is by far the number one global emergency, even though we tend to think of COVID-19 crisis and then the Russia-Ukraine war crises, because they happen very quickly as much bigger events, but they're not. Climate change is going to dwarf both the COVID-19 and the Russia-Ukraine war in terms of the longer-term impacts that it's going to bring, and particularly for the next generation. We are leaving behind a devastated Earth for our own children. So in a real sense, I would say that the Vanuatu resolution in the General Assembly is actually not between one set of countries, the vulnerable countries, against other set of countries. Maybe you might call them the polluters, but we're all polluters in that sense. But it is really on behalf of the next generation. And the Honorable Minister made this point in his intervention, that it is for our children, all our children, on behalf of the children, the next generation, to alert our generation, the older generation, that we are not doing what we are supposed to do. We've agreed what to do. So it's not about not agreeing. There's no argument. It's just doing what we said we would do. And we're not doing that. And so we need to be held to account. Every single one of us needs to be held to account as to why we aren't doing what we are supposed to do. And the accountability, in my eyes, comes from my children. I look at them. They hold me accountable. They say, why have you not done what you said you would do? You said you'd do it, and you are not doing it. And so I take it very, very personally, as you know, Christopher, that this is an issue that every single one of us has to stand up as a citizen of planetary Earth and hold ourselves accountable to our own children and our own grandchildren. And this, to me, supersedes all the politics between governments and countries and companies and CEOs of companies. We're all human beings, every single one of us, and we must take our personal responsibilities seriously, and in particular personalize it to responsibility to our own sons, daughters, grandsons, and granddaughters. And I'm seeing that happen, and the Vanuatu lobbying campaign and advocacy campaign has caught on to that. To me, that is the most important part of the advocacy for the Vanuatu campaign. Hopefully, the decision goes well. We send you good wishes to New York from Dhaka, but the struggle goes on. Whether we get a unanimous consensus decision or just a simple majority, I'm not going to even contemplate losing. We will win either by a majority or by consensus. So good wishes to Malcolm and friends in New York. We will be watching with great intensity and sending you good wishes on the 29th of March when the resolution comes up for the final vote. Hopefully, it'll be unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Salim. And you're absolutely right. I mean, this is something that we've all agreed, and it is so different today than it was even just 5 years ago. Everybody has now felt the impact of climate change, and we all are doing this for our own benefit. It's no longer us against them, North versus South, rich versus poor. This is truly a question for all humanity. And I'm so glad that the world is backing this. 116 nations, just incredible. And I have a feeling it'll be more. And I also expect that this will be adoption by consensus. And I hope the court feels that powerfully and takes that mandate to really give us a good advisory opinion that can be constructive and helpful. So we're coming to the very end of this session, and I very much appreciate the reflections of the panel. What I might do is go around and ask each of you, considering that we still have about 10 days to go before the adoption session, what would be one message that you would give to those in your sector and to your colleagues that you would want to bring before we go into this adoption session to hopefully bring on board some of those last states who have yet experiencing those reservations? What would you say about this initiative in one sentence or two sentences? And I might start with you, David, and then go to Andreas. Then I'll go to Salim. I'll go to you, Malcolm, and then we'll finish with our young Pacific Island voice to take us to the future. So over to you, David.
Thank you, Christopher. I would say very simply, if we want to see our children and our grandchildren enjoying human rights, and if we want to see the people that we share this planet with today enjoying human rights, this is the place that we need to start.
Thank you so much. And over to you, Andres.
Thanks, Christopher. We, as CAN, had just a meeting where our network convened under the claim resistance and hope. And I think often in the struggle, we look for hope. So I would say this initiative and how it looks like now actually provides hope that even beyond that, hopefully, helps us fighting for the good cause.
Wonderful. And Salim, what would you say?
So my message is to everybody who is likely to see this session that each of us as individuals now need to think of our citizenship primarily as planetary citizens, not citizens of our own country anymore. That is now a secondary citizenship. Our primary citizenship is we are citizens of planet Earth. Planet Earth is being attacked. Every single one of us must stand together to attack the enemy or fight the enemy, which is climate change that's going to hit all of us. And that the resolution in Vanuatu in New York is a very, very important step in unitedly taking this global responsibility together. Thank you.
Thank you, Salim. And over to you, Malcolm. What do you hope for as your final message?
Thank you, Chris. I would join the others in saying that we are at a critical juncture where we need to take urgent action, and as Professor Salim has alluded to, in terms of protecting the planet and humanity, and ultimately it amounts to protecting the present and future generations from the adverse impacts of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. And over to you, Langi. What's your final message from the Pacific?
Thank you, Chris. I mean, this is really about justice. This is about intergenerational equity, and it's about human rights. This work that's being led by Vanuatu and the Pacific, that has been a global campaign now, is really about people and planet. It's about our survival as humankind or mankind. And I just want to finish off by saying that it is about our beautiful ecosystem and beautiful blue planet that we call home. And so we must get everyone in every state to support this resolution, not only for our generations, but most importantly, future generations. Thank you.
Well, what a beautiful story, all of you, from addressing human rights now to doing it with hope as planetary citizens, taking action for our future generations. You just told the perfect story, and I thank you all so much for your time. I'm going to leave us now with a song that was produced by one of our famous artists here in Vanuatu, and she sings about the importance of this ICJ resolution, which I hope we will all celebrate together being adopted on the 29th of March. So thank you all so much, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.
What is happening to our world? Have you ever stopped to notice? What does it take for you to see? Lives are being lost. With all the storms raging, corals dying, ocean levels rising, it's a threat to our human rights. Fossil fuels burning us past 1.5 degrees. What are we gaining from this madness of people in danger? We're calling out to you, International Court of Justice, an advisory opinion on human rights and climate change. We're calling out to you, United Nations, leaders of today, protect the rights of the human race. We're calling out to you.
Yeah, we have a duty to all of mankind. Legal obligations must stand to defend our rights.
This chance to get clarity from the International Court of Justice on the legal obligations in a struggle for survival with a million voices. Save the Paris Agreement, everyone must act. So better mankind, wake up now, it's not too late. Raise your voices up, speak for the children of tomorrow. With every forest burning, every person moving, every day is passing by, and time is running out. Bit by bit the world is heating over, and it seems to never end. We're calling out again.
We're calling out to you, International Court of Justice, an advisory opinion on human rights and climate change. We're calling out to you, United Nations,
Leaders of the world,
leaders of today, protect the rights of the human race. We're calling out to you, save our world,
save our world,
save our future, save our hope for our future generation. Save our world,
save our world,
save our
save our future.
save our hope.
This is for the future generation.
What about our children? They're innocent and helpless. How can we be so blind, putting their lives in danger? Oh, the schools are damaged, cyclones hurting. Our healthcare is suffering, but we'll keep on raising our voices. International Court of Justice. change. We're calling out to you, United Nations, leaders of today, protect the rights of the human race. Calling out to